going to reveal the final part of my interview with the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, what lies ahead for a man with many ambitions. And I'll be joined by a punchy panel to dissect some of the best parts of the interview. But first, let's hear what Boris has to say on his legacy and his future. I know you hate talking about personal things and your wife and your children, but I did want to just ask you what it's like being a dad second time round. Do you do things differently when you're a parent in your 50s?
God, you know, the great thing about Mother Nature wipes the slate of memory. You have no idea. And that's why you keep doing it, because you forget how exhausting it is.
Yes. Is it more exhausting this time?
I don't know, but it's certainly exhausting. But do you know what I mean? That's her trick. She bamboozles you.
Right.
By making you forget.
But three young children in your 50s, you're enjoying that? I
love it. I'm having a very happy life in blissful rustic obscurity, working on books such as Unleash, which we haven't mentioned.
It's upside down again.
Sorry, there you go. That's a very good picture of me. By the way, do you know, I would like your view on this, Camilla. The publishers...
You're diverting again, because I've got a couple
quickly. The publishers didn't want to have this picture on the back because they thought it looked absurdly...
You haven't got a helmet on. It's very anti-health and safety.
They thought it was anti-health and safety. And what do you think?
I think it looks good.
Okay.
It's you in the countryside and your new Oxfordshire guys.
It's got the
couple more questions.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Couple more questions. Do you think you're misunderstood?
I think on the contrary. I think it's probably likely I'm all too well understood.
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
So when people criticise you as a buffoon, another regular criticism is that you're a pathological liar. Do you have a problem with the truth?
No, I think that, on the contrary, I think that the reason people get so angry, I think, and you've got to forgive me because this is my view, right? I think that a lot of very clever people were driven potty by Brexit. And they couldn't believe that their arguments, which they thought were better, had been defeated in the course of that referendum campaign.
Although some people thought you were economical with the truth before Brexit.
And instead of taking it lying down and accepting that they'd lost the argument, they decided to attack the people who'd won the argument, in particular me, but others as well, of course. And to try to undermine our credibility and to say it was all based on a pack of lies. And they attacked, in particular, the bus of truth. The bus.
Well, the figure of 350 million has since been debunked?
No. If anything,
you say in the book, even if it was half the amount, it would still be a good thing for the NHS.
So the 350 was the gross term, and we had this argument during the referendum campaign about 500 times. So no one could say that all this was concealed. The half of that was spent by the EU directly in our own country. The rest we simply sent to Brussels to be spent on whatever, on Greek tobacco farms or whatever they wanted to spend it on. It's a lot of money.
Yes.
And it was rising. So the 350 by 2020. I think I'm right in saying that the 350 was due to rise to 420.
Okay.
And you're starting to talk some, even the net sum was starting to be pretty serious money.
But you think the brickbats are down to Brexit, and I'm saying that you've always been a divisive figure. Is it perhaps?
Really?
I've read this book, and it's a really readable book. It's beautifully written, as one would expect. It's actually laugh out loud funny at times. But does it betray the fact that there's a lack of seriousness about you that was ill-suited to you having the highest office in the land?
No, because as I think we've exhaustively demonstrated in the course of this conversation, Camilla, in spite of some appallingly difficult times and a pandemic and coming at the end of a long period of Tory government, we got some pretty astonishing things done.
What would you like your legacy to be? Is it delivering Brexit? Is it levelling up? Is it the vaccine?
I think that all three of those were incredibly difficult to do, as was mustering a coalition of support for Ukraine.
Yes.
But I'm proud of them. Those four things.
Yes.
It is levelling up that is still the work in progress. It is happening. I mean, what's so sad about what's happening right now in the UK is that we've junked some of the infrastructure stuff. When I
What
was,
do you mean HS2?
yeah, and the Northern Powerhouse Rail.
Yeah.
This is crucial. Why should London and the South East be the only parts of the country to have really, really good mass transit systems?
Yes.
But the rest of the country is full of
critics will
genius.
say that the trouble with all of that was that you're too profligate. This was a Sunak criticism. You had to put the chequebook away. You're all for massive infrastructure projects, but they've all got to be paid for.
You've got to have growth.
And then you preside over a Tory administration that raises people's taxes.
Yeah,
and then you wonder why you're ditched.
No, that certainly wasn't the reason.
Or high immigration.
And there was plenty of.
Been pretty relaxed about immigration, and that's one of the reasons why Reform and Farage have prospered. Because under the Conservatives, you let too many people in and didn't control the borders adequately.
We did control them. What people have forgotten was that during the pandemic, immigration fell off a cliff, and nobody came.
Well, that's because the borders were all closed.
And so what then? Have you ever listened?
Come on.
Yes, and so then.
Since it's risen to the historically high levels of 745,000 last year.
And in 2022, there was a very good reason for that. You will recall that as we came out of as we came out of the pandemic, because those numbers we agree. But what happened was the Migration Advisory Committee did allow a lot of people in because we had a total crisis with the shelves not being stacked and nobody to drive the fuel lorries, and a real crisis in the labour market, which you will remember was driving inflation.
Yes.
And that is the number one foe of the British people and of the UK economy, because that destroys savings and greatly destroys investment and weakens the economy. So we had to stop inflation getting out of control. And so what happened was that in that particular year, the Migration Advisory Committee, I think unquestionably, allowed too many people to come in, and the numbers for social care and for some of the other categories were way too high. But that was a decision taken by agencies of the UK government, which we decided to do. It was a mistake. People can now see that.
You're always quite relaxed about mass migration.
And what we have now, but which we didn't have before, is legal control. Now, there's the wholly separate issue of the illegal immigrants coming from across the Channel, and there, because of Brexit, we are actually able to deal with it with the Rwanda policy.
I know, but then the boat crossings increased post-Brexit.
And they did.
People thought it was absolutely ludicrous to suggest that we had taken back control of our borders when thousands of people are arriving by dinghy.
I know, which was why it was so important
for Rwanda
to have the deterrent in place in the form of the Rwanda policy. And it took an amazing amount of work to get that done. And I really pay tribute to Priti Patel, and to get that thing done, to get a deal with Rwanda so that we could send people who arrived in Kent direct to Kigali. Boom. That was an amazing achievement.
I know, but it now can't happen because the Tories failed.
No, because Starmer's dropped it.
And but also because the Tories failed to win the last election.
Yeah, but yes, but
which you have to play a part in.
No,
do you want to
no.
You don't play any part at all in the recent election.
I wasn't there. Where was I? Just let me repeat my point. When I left office, when I resigned, we were a handful of points behind, right?
Yes.
I think in that week there was one poll that put us 2 points behind.
Okay.
I think you will agree that with the boundary changes and everything else, it would have been possible for me to overcome a 2-point deficit in 2.5 years.
Well, you might have lost your seat.
Right?
Fair.
I might have overcome a 2-point deficit in 2.5 years. Plus, reform was on zero, right? Okay? So that was...
Not have won Uxbridge.
That was the position... No, I think I would have won Uxbridge.
All right.
Why not?
Okay.
Why not? That was the position as I left it, right? I was not responsible for what then happened.
Okay. So are you itching to come back and try and... Do you want to... What was this Cincinnatus comment about returning to the plough?
Cincinnatus.
Come back.
Cincinnatus. So Cincinnatus was Cincinnatus used to return. I have basically taken up my plough. I think that I'm living a very happy life of blameless, rustic obscurity.
I don't know if you like obscurity, though.
Blameless rustic obscurity.
Do you like obscurity?
Yeah, and I'm working on various books, such as I've produced this one, obviously.
Yeah. Shakespeare's coming.
that's right, and various things like that.
But don't you want to return to the political fray in the vein
as I
of your
used to
hero
say,
Churchill?
as I used to say, and I repeat, I think the chances of my mounting a comeback, getting back into number 10, are about as good as my chances of being reincarnated as an olive, or decapitated by a frisbee, or being locked in a disused fridge, or blinded by a champagne cork.
You literally used those phrases to describe the unlikelihood of you becoming Prime Minister, and then you became Prime Minister. So you could stage a comeback.
I think it remains of that order of probability.
And what?
I don't know what the odds are of being blinded by a champagne cork, or locked in a disused fridge, or decapitated by a frisbee.
Well, you did once lock yourself in a fridge, to be fair.
It was not disused. It was very cold. That was at the beginning of the general election campaign.
So can we get a yes or no? Are you going to make a political comeback? Yes or no?
I think my chances are about as good as being locked in a disused fridge.
That's not a no, is it?
Or blinded by a champagne cork.
What are you going to be doing for GB News, colleague?
Well, I don't know.
What would you like to do?
Well, I'm very happy that this is the first TV interview to be recorded about my political.
But are you going to do a series for us?
Which is about
Boris on Britain?
And it's about believing in Britain, believing in our national ability to do things independently. It's about believing in levelling up, believing in the potential of the whole country, and believing in Britain abroad.
Well, you're perfectly aligned with our audience, because nobody believes in Britain more than GB News viewers.
Well, I know. I'm a great fan of GB News and have been since your book, your inception. And all I hope for is that the footprint of GB News will grow, and more people will understand that it's a great addition to our.
Do you watch much BBC these days?
I don't know when. I literally cannot think when I last sat down to watch BBC News. It's terrible admission.
Do you think the BBC is biased?
I don't know. I don't watch it. What is it?
Well, do you think so? What's your instinct?
I hesitate to criticise.
You might feel it was biased against you.
But I don't know. I mean, I just never. What do you think? I never watch it really. But I mean, I didn't. But I've never had time when I was in number 10, and I just don't. Do you watch? Do people sit down and watch? Is it at 10 o'clock? The 10 news at 10.
I'm a journalist. It's a bit like a busman's holiday, but a occupational hazard.
Do you actually
all of the news?
Really?
So what next immediately for Boris Johnson once you've finished promoting Unleashed, which I think is the name of your autobiography?
It is.
I'm not sure you've promoted it heavily enough.
No, well, you've been very, very kind. I have to admit, you've been wonderful.
What's next?
So I've got to get some more wood into the shed.
Yeah.
Winter's drawing in.
Oh, have you got a wood burning stove? Does Mr. Gove know about this?
That's good. Yes, I mustn't give the game away here. I think it's all right. I'm in a wood burner. I think it's okay. I think the local council allows us to. I've made some jam, which I have to finish off.
That's very Meghan.
Yeah. Does she make jam? Well, my problem with my jam is resolutely refuses to coagulate.
Oh.
So it's more, and it's sitting there in the fridge in a sort of kind of vat.
It's nicely alliterative, though. Johnson's jam.
Yeah.
If you were to call it that.
I could try.
Is that a note upon which should we end on that sweet spot?
End on that sweet spot. Thank you very much.
Boris Johnson, thank you
Camilla,
very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
To discuss Unleashed. You've been unleashed on GB
Unleashed.
today.
It's very hard to keep this book under control.
Indeed.
It is.
It's very hard to keep you under control in an interview setting, but we've tried our best.
You've done. It's been great fun. Thank you
very much indeed. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Great. Thank you.
Well, there we are. At times harder to pin down than jelly. I mean, you do have to do this thing of bringing him back onto the actual question you've asked. Otherwise, he will just speak for 10 to 15 minutes on a subject of his choosing. Anyway, we're going to be analysing every cough and spit of it next with an expert panel of political experts. Experts twice, doubly expertise. So do stay tuned, because we're going to be downloading on the Boris interview next.
Britain's Newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
So I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm going to see your show, Behind the Shoulder Pads, one night only at the Adelphi Theatre, October the 22nd. You're talking about your extraordinary life. Stage, screen, published author, 19 books, TV, most important.
Yeah.
Is there anyone who's managed to straddle, 7-8 decades in showbiz and still be at the top?
Yes, I was thinking about that the other day because somebody said, you know, The Last of the Good. There is a Shirley MacLaine.
Sure.
She started at the same time as me.
Right.
Sophia Loren.
Yeah.
She started around the same time.
She's not working much, though.
It's true, she's not, but she's still out there being, you know, a major icon. And of course, people like Dick Van Dyke, who's just almost 100.
Yeah, he's incredible,
you know,
isn't he?
I'm a mere babe next to him.
You are. But and I was thinking about, you've written some extraordinary, wicked, waspish diaries, which of course you can because you've worked with so many people. Look at the names: Frank Sinatra, Lana Turner, Elizabeth Taylor, Dean Martin, Gregory Peck,
Richard Burton,
Paul Newman. The list goes on.
Gene Kelly,
and
my
Gene
favourite.
Kelly. Was he your favourite?
Yes.
Why?
Because I saw him in a movie when I was a little girl called For Me and My Gal with Judy Garland, and I just fell in love with him. It's such a cute movie. Well, they don't make movies like that anymore. And then I was lucky enough when I first went to Hollywood at age 20 to meet him and literally hang out with him and his friends. And then I put him in a movie with me that I produced. He played my husband in a movie called Sins. And he was wonderful. He was really wonderful.
The People's Channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets at My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring. Not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm joined now by my superstar panel to analyse the Boris Johnson interview. Former editor of the Sunday Mirror, Eve Pollard. Former head of broadcast, Matthew Laza. Former chief of staff to Nadeem Zahawi, James Price. And chief political correspondent for The Times, Aubrey Allegretti. Aubrey, let's start with you. I mean, I'm exhausted watching it back. Can you imagine actually doing it? He is a difficult person to interview.
You did a great job of trying to keep him on track. And I thought he spoke with real sort of moral clarity about foreign affairs issues. So Ukraine, about the support that he received from Donald Trump, about the AUKUS alliance. But when it came to some of the big domestic issues, his handling of COVID, whether or not he'd have made a better leader than Rishi Sunak and led the party to a victory at the general election, and these sorts of things, he just seemed so sort of disorientated, and I'm still not sure that he's quite fully understood exactly why he was forced out of office.
I don't think he understands, James, how angry the public still are about Partygate. There's this thing, he does this, I called it earlier, a merry-go-round of blame. At what point can Boris Johnson actually bring himself to blame Boris Johnson for Boris Johnson's demise?
It's a really good question. And there was that little moment where he said something like, of course I take full responsibility, and then sort of blunders off in another direction as well. It doesn't feel, I've not read the book yet, it doesn't feel like he's got, as Aubrey was saying, a very succinct set of answers for what went wrong. And if you've not got that, how do you manage to place yourself into that blame game? And I don't think that sort of self-introspection is very common amongst many politicians, and perhaps least of all him. And it's a kind of reminder back to how chaotic some of the years were with him. And the kind of Trump comparisons are interesting. You know, people were fatigued of 4 years of Trump, and that's why Biden came in. That kind of fatigue has disappeared, I think, for lots of Americans who kind of remember the exciting bits again. Maybe some people have got that with Boris, and you look at some of that and go, oh, that would be exhausting to have that back in charge of the country again.
Although, is there that kind of caucus of support for him in the country, Eve? The difference between Boris Johnson and somebody like Donald Trump is, even when out of office, you've got people wearing baseball caps saying, "Make America great again." There aren't people wearing baseball caps in this country saying, "Bring back Boris."
No, but that's partly because we don't wear baseball caps a lot.
And that's a good thing, I think we can all agree.
It's a leadership contender.
Let's press ourselves.
Bobby J, yes, that's right, Robert Jenrick.
What is interesting, of course, he's still got an enormous amount of charm, and that's not very visible with many politicians. But of course, as you say, he's got no idea, and it was fascinating. He still, I don't think, really realises he was sewn up totally by Sue Gray. And I also found it was fascinating, the first word he used, and you said, what are you doing now? He said, I'm living a blameless...
Yes. I should have, to be fair, I should have seized on the blameless.
As a woman, I'm afraid that hit me in the eye.
Oh, I see what you mean, because of his extracurricular activities.
I don't suppose he has any time for extracurriculars because he's got a lot of books to publish.
We didn't go into that.
Well, I understand. You had so much to cover.
I think he may have walked out of the studio if we'd gone on to more personal matters.
But and there are a lot of people who felt that he stood up for Britishness, you know, the British lion, the British, you know, Union Jack and everything. Talked about levelling up. Levelling up, nobody really felt they'd be levelled up in the Midlands, did they? I mean, no. I'm not sure they do today. It wasn't the big thing he said, and I personally didn't agree with Brexit. And I know the idea is a wonderful idea, but it meant half the people we needed in this country vanished off.
Eve, we are not going to re-enter the referendum
you're quite right.
of yesteryear. Otherwise, we would need a whole other programme. But, Matthew, as our resident lefty here, response to the Boris bluster.
Well, I think, you know, from what everybody said, I would sum that up as... I agree with much of what everybody said. I'd sum that up as Fantasyland. I think he's still living in Planet Boris, which bears very little relation to the truth and very little relation to what the British people feel about his time as Prime Minister. I mean, I think the key thing for me was he wouldn't take responsibility. The only thing he basically said that he did wrong was not, as you say, hugging Tory MPs, not communicating properly with his own backbenchers, not taking responsibility for what went on in Downing Street, whether or not he was individually holding a slice of cake, but we know we know that things went on his watch, and it's, you know, a good leader takes responsibility, and I think people watching that will realise why he isn't Prime Minister, and that's because he lives in a world of his own.
I mean, that lack of grip at number 10 that I mentioned to him, Aubrey, I mean, I thought one of my harshest lines is when I say maybe you're just not Prime Minister now because you weren't a very good Prime Minister.
And I think it was the moment where he showed the most contrition, where he seemed to understand that he hadn't worked hard enough to kind of keep the sprawling camp of Conservative MPs elected in 2019 together. And you kept asking him about reform, and he kept sort of batting away those questions, saying, well, they were basically polling at 0% at the time. And it's so interesting to reflect on the criticisms of him when he was in Downing Street. You know, on net zero, he was one of the biggest advocates for it, and yet that was Reform's arguably sort of first argument against the Conservatives. On migration, it rose to record high levels under Rishi Sunak, but it was certainly still very high under Boris Johnson post-Brexit as well. And I think we sort of forget that actually the Conservative coalition was fracturing during his premiership. Boris Johnson lost 3 by-elections to the Liberal Democrats. He was not sort of soaring high forever in the polls. There was that fantastic moment where he got a real sort of vaccine bounce in April 21, but after that it really dissipated, and I don't think he ever quite realised that that really was his fault.
Yeah. Also, this lack of responsibility for the Tory-geddon that we witnessed in the summer. I mean, James... On one hand, you could say, well, he's such a brilliant politician because he's such a big tentist. On one hand, he's a Brexiteer. On the other, he's literally Ed Miliband's long-lost twin brother on net zero. What a wonderful combination of righty and lefty. But then that's part of the reason why it all went wrong, isn't it?
Well, you can be so open-minded that your brain falls out, right? And I think this is part of the problem that you've got here, which is that what does Boris Johnson really believe in? And that was the big problem before his election as leader and then as Conservative Party, leader of the party and then as Prime Minister. What did he really believe in? He seemed to agree with the last person to be in the room with him, which is caused a lot of that shopping trolley analogy from Dominic Cummings. Dominic Cummings, we definitely know what he believes in because he writes great long blog posts about it.
And I happen to read those?
I've read them all. I happen to think that
you've read them, so we don't have.
Whilst he needs an editor, I think he's right about everything. But Boris is unmoored and unrooted from a lot of this ideology, and so we've just just come off the back of the Tory party conference and the campaign to be his successor, but 3 or whatever it is. You've got Kemi Bader not talking about conservative philosophy and first ideas. You've got Rob Jenrick with a really well thought out set of ideas about what the state needs to be reformed into. All these interesting ideas going on. Does Boris seem like he's across any of that or interested in any of those conversations? Not really.
I mean, when you said about blamelessness being a problem, controversial thing to say, also obscurity, Eve. Does this strike you as a man who wants or enjoys or craves obscurity?
No, but the terribly sad thing is there is something about Boris that people like. I mean, you talk to people in other embassies he's been to, you talk to people in Ukraine, they all think he's wonderful. He did stand up for lots of things we do like. If he was an ambassador, I'm not sure where, maybe Ukraine, he'd be probably great. But that's fine for him because he doesn't have to make friends with everybody. He can go to bed and dream of his wonderful dreams as world king. Can't believe that Rachel made that up. No. And I think he's got something. There is a regret. I mean, that he's a voice. He's an interesting voice, and we probably have lost him. And he did disappoint us. I mean, we all thought this is going to be really interesting, and it just fell apart.
Matt, do you think that Labour, I mean, is it a help or hindrance to Labour to have Boris sort of honey-monstering around the scene, the political scene, if I can call it that? He does remind me of a human version of the honey.
That was brilliant. It's a brilliant comparison. Absolutely.
Like basically on a diet of sugar puffs the whole time.
So I think it does Labour. I think having Boris back on the scene is a great boon for Labour. I think it takes the heat off Labour's own problems over the last couple of weeks.
Distraction.
Absolutely, it's a good distraction, and also it reminds you of the chaos because it wasn't just the chaos of changing prime ministers. It was the chaos whilst Boris was prime minister. This is, we say, complete split personality between, are we going to wake up and find it's kind of, tough Boris, right-wing Boris, or is it net zero, woke, pro-mass migration Boris? So it just reminds of the absolute inconsistency that we had under the Tories, as well as personnel, but in terms of policy.
It does highlight, however, how boring Keir Starmer is by comparison.
Well, I think, yes. I don't think when, and I hope it's not for many years to come, you do the Keir interview.
To be honest, just because I think that bigger political characters are better for copy. They might not be better for the country.
Absolutely, I think that's absolutely right. Look, Boris is a big character, but watching the interview, you just remind you how bumbling he is. And you don't want that in a Prime Minister?
I know, you do indeed. So you need somebody who can speak straight. And I did interrupt a bit, but by the way, ladies and gentlemen, that's because I needed him to answer the question. Anyway, coming up next, we're going to be looking at the COVID legacy of Boris Johnson and delving a little bit more into that aspect of the interview. Don't go anywhere.
Good morning. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. It's a cloudier picture out there today with spells of rain and drizzle with sunshine and showers to start the new week. But through this morning, we have got some spells of sunshine across the far southeast. But as you can see, a lot of cloud around, and that will continue to push its way eastwards. So a largely murky afternoon to come for many of us. We also have heavy spells of rain across the west, especially across Northern Ireland into Wales and the southwest of England, perhaps even with the odd rumble of thunder here. Temperatures holding up still at around 17 or 18 degrees as the high towards the south. As we go through Sunday evening, that band of heavy rain is going to continue to push its way slowly north and eastwards, affecting much of the southern parts of Wales into the Midlands, but we may see some glimmers of late sunshine towards the far southwest. Heavy spells of rain continuing across eastern parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England. Cloudy conditions still remaining across much of Scotland with outbreaks of rain here through Sunday night. And that band of rain is going to continue to push its way north and eastwards, pushing further into Scotland and northern parts of England. Clearer skies developing further towards the west, but we'll also see some showers developing as we go into the start of Monday. So temperatures generally still holding up at around 10 or 11 degrees across the towns and cities to start Monday morning. But it could be quite a murky start for some of us with some low cloud and fog generally lifting and breaking. Once that cloud and rain continues to push its way north across Scotland, then across much of the UK, it's a case of sunny spells but also some frequent scattered showers that could be on the heavy side with the odd rumble of thunder. And we'll also see temperatures still remaining at around 16 or 17 degrees. Bye-bye for now.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey show. You might have noticed we've taken over Michael Portillo's show to analyse Boris Johnson's interview. I'm joined by a superstar panel to do that. But first, let's remind ourselves of how Boris sees his pandemic legacy. When you reflect on your pandemic legacy, it doesn't look great. You've got Dominic Cummings describing you as a shopping trolley. You've got people still not forgiven you for Partygate, rightly or wrongly. Now you're saying on lockdowns, I'm not saying that lockdowns achieved nothing. I'm sure they had some effect, but were they decisive in beating back the disease, turning that wave down? All I can say is I am no longer sure, which all sorts of amounts to you having mismanaged this pandemic quite badly.
Well, on the contrary, I would say that actually, if you look at what we did in that period and beyond, it was absolutely outstanding.
We haven't just got Cummings's analysis of it. We've also got Sir Graham Brady. He's come out with his own memoir. He's saying at 1 minute you were sort of cursing the 2-metre rule. The next you were asking him, as he was a COVID sceptic, how many people would you let die?
But I think both things are Camilla, totally consistent.
It sounds as if you you weren't decisive enough because you didn't know yourself, and therefore that's where the shopping trolley analogy comes from.
Well, I
I
totally reject that because that's total nonsense. Because any sensible we had two massively conflicting objectives, and it was absolutely irrational
to try to hold. Unfair.
Complete nonsense. Because I mean, we had to take. If you want examples of decisive action and getting things done, then look at what actually happened once the advisors that you mentioned had left Number 10, and we began the vaccine rollout.
Yes. I mean, it's difficult because on one hand, I think we can all sympathise with how much of a hospital pass, pardon the pun, he was handed, OK? He comes into power on the back of an 80-seat majority. There's a part in the book where he goes, you know, if you had said to me in January 2020, of all the things I had to worry about, it was a bat-related flu from Wuhan in China, I would have said, you can strike me down with a feather. So we get that. But there's no real cogent defence to the shopping trolley analogy. You're shaking your head, Matt.
Yeah, no, there isn't. Absolutely. You're completely right. I mean, it's extraordinary. It's one thing to say that you were hit by events, but it's another thing to not be able to put into words what your actual coherent response to those events were. And so, you know, it's not clear. The problem with Boris is he tries to have it, as we know, to have his cake and eat it in every sense. And on COVID, he sort of says, well, he's trying to lockdown sceptics, is trying to give a bit of leg, as it were, and he's also trying to defend what he did. So you can't have it both ways. There's no admitting that what he did may have been over the top, or he doesn't double down on it working, so he ends up looking like he doesn't believe in anything.
But you can't go full Gove. You can't go lockdown heavy like Matt Hancock, because he is a libertarian at the heart of it, Eve.
Yes.
He was so conflicted during this whole period.
And also,
by the way, I'm not excusing how badly he did manage the pandemic, but I am explaining, but
he doesn't explain it himself. He doesn't go through, this is what the situation was on January the 3rd. I mean, I can remember I was in America when the whole thing started, and I remember watching, they were all going towards Cheltenham that Saturday.
Yes.
And I remember shouting, stop people travelling now. Stop, you know, you could... we were shouting this, English people in America at the time. We did have to come back and all that. But it was slow. It was unsure.
But then the inquiry is going to look at whether we should have shut down harder and sooner.
Yeah.
And actually, he's talking about the two-humped camel curve, which suggested that, to a certain extent, lockdowns worked. But if you compare our result with Sweden's and all the rest of it, there's not now much in it, with the benefit of hindsight, James. But, I mean, to say that nobody was partying during Partygate, I should have been a bit more robust there. I should have said, hang on a minute, there were some parties where there was wine up the walls. They were partying the night before Prince Philip's funeral.
So look, I was in government at the start of COVID coming through, and in some of these early meetings when you've got these people you'd never met before coming in and saying this is going to be so terrible, reasonable worst case scenario, 500,000 people dead really soon, we're going to have to be running crematoria 24/7 to burn all the bodies, and we're going to have to relax. You know, we ended up relaxing the rules that had been put in place for Harold Shipman. They required multiple doctors' signatures because you're going to need doctors just rubber stamping things. You know, it was properly apocalyptic, and so the idea that someone fresh-ish into government, 6 months in as PM and only just with a new mandate, would be able to say no to any of this stuff. Let's take a longer look and be like Sweden or the rest of it and go against all the kind of scientific establishment stuff. I've got loads of sympathy for Boris on that. And again, I think that you mentioned the inquiry that's going on feels more and more like a blame game than actually trying to get to the truth of any of it. But as Matthew says, is Boris particularly interested in getting to the truth of this? Has he come up with, put his finger on exactly what he should have done better in different ways so that we can learn for the future? I'm not so sure. I've even got sympathy for some of the people in Number 10 who were, you know, drinking at their desks, frankly. I wasn't at any of these parties. I'd left government at that point. You know, it was incredibly stressful, and talk to friends who were in there. You know, you've got the whole weight of the world on your shoulders, but you just can't get away with doing, you know, the kind of activities that came out.
Aubrey, was this following of the science just a massive buck-passing exercise for a Prime Minister who couldn't make his mind up?
I think the extent to which that is demonstrated most clearly is looking at, most people won't remember this, but winter 21, when there was talk about whether or not there would be another lockdown. And instead we had what was called kind of Plan B, where people were slightly discouraged from going to Christmas parties. And in fact, you had this slightly strange spectacle of Rishi Sunak, who was then the Chancellor, flying back from California because he feared that the government was in such disarray and that Boris Johnson was about to announce a lockdown when he thought the economy sort of wouldn't need it the most. And it just seemed to sort of typify this slightly chaotic nature to decision-making very deep into the pandemic.
Yes.
I can completely understand why in March decisions were taken which were perhaps irrational now with the benefit of hindsight, but we were 18 months on from that point, more, and yet it still didn't seem that lessons had been learned internally.
Also, we're going to talk about his trust issues, perhaps, with bringing Dominic Cummings into the fray and, indeed, his frenemy, Michael Gove. But in just a moment, we're also going to analyse what Boris Johnson said about his relationship with the late Queen and his interventions during the Mexico saga. Don't go anywhere.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
You know, is the fact that electric blanket sales going up actually a good thing? This means that people are switched on to the problems that the winter might hold, that they might have some defence against it, or is it a real indictment of a Labour government that they aren't going to be able to, you know, support elderly people in their hour of need?
Good morning, by the way.
Morning.
I think the sale of electric blankets may well be because we've had this cold snap because of the Arctic weather coming in from the north. However, I think it's an absolute reality that, as your clip said, that over 800,000 elderly people who are eligible for the winter fuel allowance, who can get pension credits, are struggling to apply. And so what is absolutely essential at the moment is that all of those older people who are eligible for pension credits do apply and do get what's owed to them. The benefits are owed to them. And that the average that people will get through pension credits is about £78 a week. So that's definitely going to make a massive difference to people who are really struggling.
What can organisations like yours do to encourage people to, I guess, educate themselves on technology and make that first step into the digital world, which is very intimidating at times?
Absolutely, and that's what we do at Good Things Foundation. So we're a national charity. We work all across the whole of the UK. And in your clip there, you had Links Digital, and they're a member of what we call the National Digital Inclusion Network, which is a network of local charities, small local community organisations, food banks, job centres, old people's clubs. So anyone, any organisation at that local level.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm still joined by my panel. I'll reintroduce you, Matthew Larser, Eve Pollard, James Price and Aubrey Allegretti. But let's first remind ourselves of Boris's relationship with the late Queen. Did you have a bit of a testy relationship with King Charles? Did you get on with the Queen and Prince Philip a bit better than...
No, I think, look, I mean, what's certainly fair to say is that I used to see the Queen every week.
Yes.
And that was one of the great, great joys of the job, because it was kind of free psychotherapy.
Yeah.
And there was no confession so appalling that, you know, she'd heard it all before, right?
Would you say she had her work cut out with you compared to other prime ministers?
I don't know. You'd have to, well, I don't know. She was always, look, she was, what I can say is she was always very supportive and kindly and full of really good advice. And so she wouldn't, you know, I sort of have a fair idea of what she thought about lots of things, but she wouldn't really reveal her hand much, but she would
You
nudge
indicate
you.
that she's a bit Brexity.
No, I wouldn't go into her political views, and that wouldn't be right.
Also, you say in the book about you think that she did hold on. She was very ill, but she was as sharp as a tack towards the end.
Yeah.
And you think that she held on to do the prime ministerial
I do believe
handover
that.
between
Well, no,
you
that
and
was
Truss.
that was actually what her private secretary Edward Young said.
Yes.
He was a very, very nice and good man, and I do think it is. He said that you know, she had been unwell for a long time, but she was absolutely determined to fulfil her constitutional duty, which was to oversee the peaceful transfer of power from one administration to the next. And she did that. And
Doing
also
her duty till the very last.
Absolutely. And she was, and she also, I think, to add to her already record-breaking tally of prime ministers who've served under her, she probably wanted one more.
Well, as I say, I'm joined by Matthew, Eve, James and Aubrey. Eve, what do you think? What do you make of his relationship with the late Queen?
Oh, well, he would have loved her and she would probably have loved him. And I'd love the Boris book of things that Her Majesty the Queen told me would be very interesting, because she'll say something and he will accept it as one way and we'll all say, she was telling him to leave then, wasn't she? In a very subtle Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II way. And she was brilliant at putting things very nicely. So when she was saying, you don't have to be there, but you have to be useful, you think she's probably thought, is he any use? Can he be useful? But she would never, ever criticise him, I think. She would just be very subtle.
But it's an important point of counsel for any Prime Minister, Matthew, isn't it? To speak to the Queen weekly. He kind of described it as a degree of psychotherapy. I mean, I'm not sure whether Starmer has the same. They all have different relationships with the monarch. Obviously, now it's King Charles. Starmer's probably regretful, actually, that he hasn't got the late Queen's counsel.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the extraordinary things that comes out in the book is that in one of his audiences, the Queen was telling him about an RAF plane crash that he didn't know about. Yes. It's because she'd read the documents and it turns out that he hadn't. Yeah. I mean, extraordinary testament to the Queen, and I think it just confirms what we know about Boris, doesn't it? So, I mean, it really does bring, those weekly audiences do show your colours.
Indeed. Now, James and Aubrey, I know you're always dying to talk about Harry and Meghan. Especially you, James, let's be honest. So let's have a look at the clip where he discusses how he intervened to try and stop Megxit.
Prince Harry and Meghan, in my view, they came to an event we did for female education. They were brilliant. And she was particularly good and articulate and on it and on the detail.
So you got on quite well with Meghan?
Yeah. I got on well with both of them. And I also worked with Harry when he did his Invictus Games for disabled veterans in the Olympic Park. And so in a sort of, fit of pomposity, I thought, this national asset is leaving our country. I think he's a force on the whole, could be on the whole a force for good. I'm going to try and discourage him. And so I had a pathetic attempt at that. It didn't work.
No.
And there you go. I failed to avert Megxit, but I did deliver Brexit.
Ever keen to have a punchline there. James, what do you make of that?
Let's be charitable about it. I think that speaks to this sort of big-heartedness in some ways of trying to keep everybody together. And he understands the brickbats that people get almost as well as anybody else. Maybe there's some kind of Churchillian undertones here in the kind of way that Churchill was slightly slavish towards Edward VIII, and then had tried to build all these relationships with various princes of Wales and other ones as well. Maybe being the younger son of a duke or something, that he understands a little bit of that kind of Churchillian perspective as well with Harry, and trying to reach back into history for some of it. I can't say that I'm as perhaps disappointed that Meghan Markle is not in the UK as he is.
Now, James, honestly. Aubrey, I mean, what did the Times readers make of Boris Johnson? Obviously, my readers on The Telegraph have got a quite unique relationship with him. He used to work for the paper. He used to be a columnist for the paper. He's now a columnist for the Daily Mail. What's the Times' view of Johnson? Because I think that's quite telling, because they're not going to be necessarily loyalists, but there must be some grudging respect there.
It's probably shifted, again, because we view him with a sort of different perspective now to how we did 2.5 years ago when he was forced out of office. And I think ultimately his downfall, which he didn't really like to talk about, it was not Partygate, it was the Chris Pincher scandal. And it was
remind us, because we didn't touch on that much, because it came at the end of a lot of other issues. And the reason why I didn't drill into that is I did feel it was a bit of a Westminster bubble story, that not everybody watching and listening to this show remembers the intricacies. So just take it through it. Take us through it quickly.
It was sort of incremental, but it typified the frustrations that were being aired by people in government, including people like Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid, who resigned over that affair. And effectively what happened was that there was a sitting Conservative MP, Chris Pincher, who was serving as the Deputy Chief Whip, i.e. the second most senior person in charge of both discipline but also sort of pastoral issues, to make sure that all the Conservative MPs were happy, being looked after, and if they had issues to do with work or to do with their home lives, that those could be addressed. And he was accused of groping several men at a private members' club in London. And it was not necessarily that scandal that caused Boris Johnson's downfall. It was that there were accusations first that Boris Johnson had been warned about Chris Pincher's conduct previously. And Downing Street denied that, saying that he didn't know when he brought him back into government earlier that year about any issues to do with Chris Pincher. Then it emerged that there had been official warnings made to Boris Johnson about Mr Pincher's conduct. And that was when, effectively, the Downing Street line was proved to be untrue. And that was what precipitated Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid to resign on that day.
Although you could argue that they just needed an excuse and they wanted to do it anyway because momentum was building. I mean, why did Zahawi cite that as the reason?
Well,
I
think at the end it was Boris's, again, inability to acknowledge that dozens and dozens of ministers had quit and that you couldn't really keep a government together on it. But it was, as Aubrey says, that kind of accumulation of lots and lots of little things. I mean, you had Boris say there that one of the things he takes most responsibility for is not being able to put his arm around more Tory colleagues. And it's always this kind of psychodrama of putting in letters to Graham Brady or whoever it is now, sort of saying, I've not got confidence in you anymore. And a chunk of it was that people, as Boris said, were sent off in lockdown down and just getting abuse online because COVID was horrible. But a lot of it was the fact that there was this guy called Chris Pincher, and I think that it was reported that Boris once said, Pincher by name, Pincher by nature, which I'm sure he'd deny. If that's your surname, you definitely don't get involved in a groping scandal. But it was that lack of caring about what MPs were saying that did lead to the downfall.
Lack of seriousness. I mean, Matthew and Eve, Matthew first of all, let's be honest, Boris Johnson is a hate figure among the left. OK, you've got people like Alistair Campbell, Tony Blair's former spin doctor. He is so aggressive in his vocalised hatred of Johnson. He's a pathological liar. He's this, he's that. He was caught in a lie on Pincher, certainly. Is he the bogeyman that the left suggests?
Well, I think one of the issues is that he is that people just perceive that he's in politics for himself. I mean, I think people on the left respect people in the right. But on the other hand, you talked a lot about Brexit. If we remember the morning that was it a Sunday morning where he was deciding whether he was going to post an article in favour of Remain or in favour of Leave, and he was on the phone, canvassing opinion. That's not showing a man of principle. And in terms of his legacy, why he was pushed out, what's extraordinary is he claims in the interview that he was like 2 points behind. I looked him up. He was the last 4 polls were 6, 9, 20, and 10. The Labour leads before he was... none of which is 2.
Well, he may have been looking at more... Polling does vary.
It does. No, they were literally the last 4 in terms of the date order. And every single poll in 2022, before he resigned, the whole of that year, Labour was ahead.
Yes. And I have to say as well, I mean, he had lost 3 by-elections. Yes. North Shropshire in December 21 over Owen Paterson, Chesham and Amersham over the planning revolt in June 21, and then Tiverton and Honiton in June 22. Okay. So this is not a man who was at the sort of peak of his prowess by the time he was forced out.
In 30 seconds, Eve, is Boris Johnson a pathological liar?
He's not a pathological liar. He's like lots of people we know, a bit vague on the details.
But do you think he outwardly has lied during his premiership?
Oh,
that has been his
Partygate, nobody will forgive him for. Anybody who had relatives who they couldn't see in hospital will think it was an unfair, impossible situation.
But the partying or the lying and the obfuscation about the partying?
The obfuscation, standing up in the House of Commons saying there was no party, there was no... And now saying there was no cake, there was virtually no drink. Party is a party.
OK. Well, coming up next, we're going to be unpacking the unleashed Bojo and reflecting on the year since the October the 7th attack. So more analysis of the interview and then looking forward to events tomorrow in Israel. Don't go anywhere because we've got much more to cover. And I'm going to be speaking to a former Israeli politician who knows Benjamin Netanyahu better than most. And what she has to say about what's been happening in the Lebanon is going to be compelling. Don't go anywhere.
There's just 3 weeks left to grab your chance to win a whopping £36,000 cash in the Great British Giveaway. That's like having £3,000 each month for an entire year. Extra cash in your bank account that you can do whatever you like with. Take a year off and keep it to yourself. You don't even need to tell the taxman, as it's totally tax-free. For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB08, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 25th of October. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe. Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here
We do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lots more to come in the next hour. We're going to be revisiting some of the most explosive revelations from my interview with Boris Johnson. I'll be rejoined by my punchy panel to dissect all of it. But first, here's the news with Sam Francis.
Camilla, thank you and good afternoon. It's exactly at midday and the top story from the newsroom at this lunchtime. Sir Keir Starmer has raised concerns that the sparks of war in the Middle East are, he says, igniting tensions here at home with a sharp rise in hate crimes against Jews and Muslims. Writing in the Sunday Times, he's also raised fears of a direct conflict between Israel and Iran, which he says could have catastrophic global consequences. Well, the Prime Minister's warning comes as Israel has expanded its airstrikes in Lebanon while the conflict with Hezbollah intensifies there. Massive consecutive strikes have hit Beirut's southern suburbs overnight, and here are some of the latest pictures emerging out of the Lebanese capital. It comes as Israel's claiming its forces have now killed 440 Hezbollah fighters in its ground operations in southern Lebanon and destroyed 2,000 Hezbollah targets. Meanwhile, in Gaza, several deaths have been reported after a strike there on a mosque. And just a breaking line to bring you out of the Middle East. We're just hearing that Israel has issued new evacuation alerts for parts of southern Lebanon. We can take you live to Beirut, where the smoke from recent attacks continues to linger in the air. The Israeli military issued that new evacuation alert today for residents of around, they say, 25 areas in southern Lebanon, calling on them to head immediately to the north above the Awali River. So that latest line just into us that Israel has issued a new evacuation alert, 25 areas included. Well, that comes as the fourth and, for now, the final flight for the UK nationals fleeing the conflict in Lebanon is set to depart today. Foreign Secretary David Lammy has been urging anyone still in the region to leave while they can, he says, warning that future flights aren't guaranteed. And back here at home, faith leaders in the UK are calling for unity after a year of horrific suffering, they say, in the Middle East conflict. More than 2,600 protests have taken place across the UK so far, with 550 arrests and policing costs of over £46 million. Anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hate have reached record highs, with thousands of incidents recorded so far this year. In a joint letter today, faith leaders have rejected hatred and they're calling for communities to stand together. That comes as cross-community events are planned today, including vigils in Oxford and in Hyde Park, as the country marks a year since the war began. Those are the latest headlines for now. Plenty more coming out of the Middle East. We'll keep across that for you in the next hour. Now, though, back to Camilla.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thanks, Sam. And as Sam said there, we will keep you updated with any breaking news on the situation in the Lebanon. But up next, we're going to see how Boris Johnson finally admits during our interview that Rishi Sunak played a big part in his removal from number 10. Let's take a look.
We not only got Brexit done, delivered full national independence, right, which was not an insignificant thing. We then used that to deliver the fastest vaccine rollout of any European country.
Yes.
So that we were able to have the fastest economic recovery of any G7 country. When I ceased to be Prime Minister, we had, and the contrary to the predictions of the gloomsters, we had unemployment at a 50-year low, 620,000 more people in paid employment than when I became, than before the pandemic began. Unemployment, youth unemployment at a 45-year low.
So
you said I was
So what went wrong? The problem was, unfortunately, you.
No, I think that... Well,
you would still be Prime Minister now if you were a better Prime Minister.
I'm trying to tell you what the things that I'm proud of that we did as...
I mean, who else is to blame? Let's talk about Mr. Sunak.
So, hang on a sec. What we also did...
Can you please address
what
the
we
issue,
also
Mr.
did...
Sunak?
What we also did...
Rather than listing things you've done, because you've listed them all in your book. It's available from all good bookshops. Just answer my question.
Yeah, so you're making a fair point. If I was so great, how come I'm not still there?
Exactly.
Which is a reasonable...
It's a fair point, isn't it?
And I think the answer to that, sadly, is that there was an outbreak of irrationality in my party, and I think they made the wrong calculation. And you ask about Rishi and Rishi...
Maybe you just weren't good enough. Maybe you weren't a good enough Prime Minister.
If you look at the record...
Maybe you're a great writer and a good journalist.
I direct you to what we did. Yes, I do. If you ask me, if you really push me to say, was it all a terrible mistake to kick me out? Yes, I think it was.
But was that Rishi Sunak?
And I think it was a goof. And yes, I think he was badly advised.
Badly advised?
I think he was badly advised. I think he was.
Well, what role did he play in your downfall?
The role of he was a close colleague and friend who turned on me at a particularly critical time, and I thought it was a mistake. It was worse than a crime. It was a mistake, and so it proved.
So you think if you were still in power, you'd have won the last general election?
I think we would have. I think we would have had a very good shot. Yes, I think we would. I mean, as I just remind you, we were only a handful of points behind in the polls. Nothing like the huge gaps that opened up, and reform, which is we were discussing earlier.
Yes.
Was on zero.
Whew. Well, I'm joined by a superstar panel to analyse that. Matthew Laza, Eve Pollard, James Price and Aubrey Allegretti. Thank you for remaining with me this morning for this Boris bonanza. James, I mean, you were close to power because you were advisor to Nadhim Zahawi, who's a very close ally to Boris Johnson and actually close to Rishi Sunak. What was the nature of the breakdown of the relationship between the Prime Minister and his Chancellor?
I mean, you can see there, I think that's definitely the best bit of the interview, where he's sort of lost for words. Is he going to say the things he really wants to say and kind of twist the knife in? And these kind of psychodramas between Prime Ministers and Chancellors, I mean, we've seen them all before, Blair and Brown, we've seen lots of these other ones, and it only really... I think you can get a successful government really when they're really close to one another. And look at Cameron and Osborne. I think they worked hand in glove with each other because, you think about it, you go into the cabinet room with the Chancellor, you've got the whole 2,000 Treasury civil servants with all the analysis you want, and the PM has maybe one or two people with him. He wants to do stuff and spend things, and the Chancellor is there to say, no, you're not allowed to. So there's already that kind of inherent tension in there. And I've got some sympathy with Boris, thinking that Rishi, at a crucial moment, turned around and knifed him. There were times where all the other members of the cabinet would come out and tweet support for Boris and something, and Rishi wouldn't for many, many hours. And you obviously knew that he was there umming and ahhing. Am I going to resign now? Is that best for me or not? And so I've got a lot of sympathy. I actually found Rishi's original resignation letter still left in the photocopier in the Special Advisor's office in the Treasury because we went in and succeeded after them. I've got that at home that maybe I'll auction off at some point.
Put that up in the Price toilet. Aubrey, do you think that Sunak knifed him because he himself at that point had an eye on the premiership?
I think it's probably fair to assume that Rishi Sunak reached the end of his tether and decided that that was the moment at which it was most advantageous for him to resign. I think he knew that there would be others that followed suit behind him. But I think ultimately Boris Johnson is displaying an incredible amount of revisionism about what would have happened if he had stayed in post. Again, you cannot sort of forget these facts. Boris Johnson was under investigation for lying to the House of Commons about Partygate, an inquiry that eventually precipitated his resignation to head off a suspension from the House of Commons that almost certainly would have involved a by-election. Now, like we just said, he'd lost several by-elections. The sort of personal animosity against him was so high at that point that I think he would have struggled to hold on to his seat.
Yeah.
We would have been in this incredible situation, and I just think it would have been hard for him to hold on.
I mean, asked him about Uxbridge. He said, I would have won Uxbridge. Maybe he would have with the LTN thing and the kind of adverse response to some of Sadiq Khan's eco measures. Matthew, I mean, one of the reasons why people deserted the party was the successive prime ministers, was Liz Truss. If Boris Johnson had remained in place, we wouldn't have had Liz Truss, we wouldn't have had the disastrous mini-budget, we wouldn't have had Rishi Sunak, an unelected prime minister that people couldn't really believe in. We've now got a situation where Nigel Farage of Reform is saying he's going after Labour voters. He wouldn't be able to say that, not least in the Red Wall, if Boris Johnson was still Conservative leader.
Well, it would have been much harder, but I think if Boris Johnson was still Conservative leader and migration was at the levels it is, I think he would be. I mean, I think one of the things that was interesting about the interview was how he wouldn't accept responsibility at all for the fact that net migration went up, obviously excluding COVID, after we left the EU. And it's been higher in the last years of the Tories than it ever was under any of the Labour governments. But it's not just the Prime Ministers. I think what sometimes the Tories forget is we've had not just 5 Prime Ministers, we had 5 different governing philosophies.
Yes.
You know, we had austerity, then under Cameron, squeeze middle under Theresa, cakeism, bit of everything from Boris, extreme Reaganomics from Truss, and then I'm not quite sure how you describe Sunakism, kind of managerialism, basically.
Yeah.
So that's 5 different approaches. It's not just like it wasn't just there was a personality difficulty or there was a slip. What direction is the country going in?
Would he have done better than Rishi Sunak on July the 4th?
I don't think so. I mean, I think they were both doomed, really. You're living in a country where the costs for everything are going up. I know that's true worldwide, but people just here feel they've been battened down, they've got less money to spend. You look at television viewing, you look at all sorts of things, you can see people not going out as much. Nobody can afford it. And all you know is that party had it. They'd had 14 years, and the world was saying enough.
But then he says that then he's not to blame for that because it's Tory colleagues losing their nerve. I mean, he does make a point, doesn't he, about the Tories' unbelievable ability to stab themselves, not just in the foot, but in the face. What is wrong with these people?
And pretty publicly, too. But he obviously had no control. He could not phone somebody up and say, I hear you're going to do this. Please don't. It will help nobody. Come and see me. You don't feel he ever did those sort of things.
Brief word. What's wrong with the Tories, James?
Oh, God, we haven't got long enough for that. Well, but Matthew's point there is exactly right. You know, what does the Conservative Party believe in? Conservatism is a much richer, deeper tradition, and alongside the kind of classical liberalism of Margaret Thatcher as well. You throw that into the mix, it's the best, I think, combination for the country. Yeah. But when it's this kind of reheated cakeism, as you talked about, or whatever else, it's much better than socialism, even on its worst day. But we need to get to the bottom of what we actually believe in, which is why this Tory party contest now is running so long.
Also, it's classic Johnson, isn't it? You know, there's no party discipline. At what point do you take vicarious responsibility for that? If there's no discipline in a newspaper, you blame the editor.
Correct.
If there's no discipline at this TV channel, you blame the CEO.
Yeah.
You blame the Prime Minister if there's no discipline in the Conservative Party. Shall we see what Boris Johnson said about his regrets at hiring Sue Gray to be the Partygate inquisitor? How about Sue Gray? Is she responsible for your demise? What did you make of her appointment as Starmer's Chief of Staff?
I thought it was extraordinary, to be honest. But there you go. But look, but again, you asked me about mistakes I made. I shouldn't have appointed her and asked her to do that thing. And
why?
Do
you think that she?
Well, because it turned out what I didn't know, though, was she'd already been approached to be the Chief of Staff of Ed Miliband, and
who you're very close to on the net zero front.
And you and I were at the same primary school.
But Sue Gray, should she not have been appointed? Should she not have that role in Downing Street? She's in a very influential position.
I think that, look, I mean, it's far be it from me to intrude on Labour's private grief, but, you know, I do wonder what on earth is going on with those guys. I mean, you know, this guy, Wahid Ali, why is he giving money to... What was it about this MP called Conlon that made him...
money for wallpaper and things.
No, on the contrary, as soon as I knew that money going into what was then the ill-fated refurbishment fund for the whole of Number 10, as soon as I knew that it had come from a particular Tory donor, I paid him back in full, because I thought I cannot be, even though the money was going on the blooming Number 10 flat, which was, not something that I owned.
Well, do you think Starmer's getting an easy ride compared to how you were treated when you made these sorts of errors? Is he getting off lightly with Donagate and
I'm
freebies?
sure people were totally right to try to beat me up and, whatever. That's politics. And look, I don't blame the Tory party for wanting to chuck me out if they thought that was genuinely, that's what Tories do. That's how they behave.
Regicidal.
I tried to explain to them that it would not end well.
Okay.
And it didn't.
Got Aubrey Allegretti tutting. We'll come on to you in a moment in reaction to that clip. But Matthew Laza, I mean, it is extraordinary now, isn't it, that Sue Gray turned out to be Keir Starmer, not Ed Miliband, Chief of Staff. Although I wanted to react to the Ed Miliband thing by basically making a point about him being an equally net zero zealot.
Absolutely.
But, I mean, Sue Gray is being tapped up by Labour to be in charge of Keir Starmer's Downing Street operation, while at the same time apparently carrying out an impartial report into Partygate.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sue maintains that discussions only took place after the report, but I mean...
Starmer was asked that repeatedly, I think, by Nick Ferrari on LBC and couldn't answer.
Yeah, I mean, and we also, he referenced, he slightly mauled the name, as he does, but he referenced Sue Gray's son, who's now a Labour MP, is called Liam Conlon. To be honest, anybody who put that into Google way before would know. Liam Conlon's been a long-time Labour activist. I think he chaired the Labour Party Irish Society for a long time. So it wouldn't have been news.
In relation to Lord Ali having given Liam Conlon 10 grand for his election campaign, one of only 2 prospective Labour MPs, and lo and behold, he gets a pass, we think, given to him by Liam Conlon's mum, Sue Gray. This is murky.
I mean, look, Labour's got its issues over that. I mean, I would say that Wahid Ali, who's a Labour peer, is the donors that Boris used to have. I mean, Eve was saying earlier that was reminding us of the Dalesford Organics food boxes that used to turn up at the corner of Downing Street throughout the premiership of Mr Johnson.
Yes, no, indeed. Aubrey, why were you tutting?
Well, I think what Boris Johnson struggles to get away from is that he is literally recorded standing up in the House of Commons saying that he accepts Sue Gray's report and its recommendations in full. And so it looks difficult now if you're trying to muddy the waters. It looks like you're sort of trying to get one over on your political opponent, Keir Starmer, by claiming that she had some sort of underhand intentions, when at the time you stood there and took responsibility for everything and said what she found was correct.
Also, unless I've got fuzzy memory syndrome, which probably likely after the week we've all had, the Sue Gray report wasn't as bad as everyone thought it would be, was it?
No, I mean...
that was the point, yeah.
That was the point. I mean, we were expecting
it could be worse. People were expecting it to be worse.
She could have gone full Harriet Harman and just taken him down to Chinatown. It was kind of all right.
Right, I think that the broader problem with all this is that the Prime Minister is also, he's the First Lord of the Treasury, but he's also the Minister for the Civil Service. Now, if you accept someone like Dominic Cummings' analysis of the weakness of the British state, and I do, this idea that someone would call it the blob, and the fact that it's so damn difficult to get anything done. Right, and it's only COVID that, is so extraordinary that we managed to get things done, like the vaccine rollout, by ignoring all the main rules. If you're the Prime Minister and you're being frustrated that you're pulling these metaphorical levers and not being able to get the levelling up you want or not being able to get the change you want done, you're the only person who could do something about that. So if you've got these people who, lo and behold, turn out to be massive Labour supporters and now chiefs of staff, which doesn't surprise me in the slightest, you're the person whose job it is to kind of, to use a Boris phrase, to clear out those Augean stables, right? To clear all the effluence away and get a system in that actually works. He didn't do that because he was too busy being distracted by who knows what.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
But it's interesting you're mentioning Dominic Cummings and Sue Gray in the same breath there. We've now got 2 administrations where we are talking about the advisor, the person who should practically be invisible in the background.
Being bigger than the Prime Minister, almost.
Being bigger than Prime Minister, having arguments with the head of policy, Morgan McSweeney, pushing desks away. It's so reminiscent, all that, of the Johnson era. Who wants to have the Prime Minister's ear? Who's closer to power? I bet the public finds it rather pathetic. But anyway, coming up next, we're going to be looking, finally, once we conclude this whole interview extravaganza, we're going to be looking at the legacy and future of Boris Johnson. See you in 3.
This This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
My kingdom for a voice. Scientists have, I can't believe this story, scientists have incredibly recreated the voice of Richard III using both his skull shape and a knowledge of medieval speech patterns. Me neither. The result is that the king, who was famously killed at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, would have spoken in English close to that of a man from modern-day Yorkshire or Somerset. Let's take a listen.
The sun shines with no less licht and splendour, nor does it suffer any diminution of its strength.
Let's discuss this further with Yvonne Morley-Chisholm, the voice coach behind the project, who spent 10 years researching how the monarch would have sounded. Yvonne, you can probably see from my face, I have no idea how this works. Can you enlighten me as to what all this is about?
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Dawn. Yes, I had a mad idea 10 years ago. I normally work with actors where we have a recording of a historical person, and we do something called vocal profiling to train the actor who's going to be performing on stage or screen to move their tongue tip, their jaw, their lips, everything, and get behind the personality of who they're playing. We obviously have quite a lot of that missing from Richard. We don't have a recording of him, but I wondered how far we could go. And a key player in this has been and is Professor Caroline Wilkinson, who over a decade ago created his face, first of all, from his skull. Now, on the day we, as Shakespeare would say, shuffle off our mortal coil, every little dent and dimple in the bones says how fit and strong the muscles were. So I thought, OK, we know what his face could do.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
Oh, no, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. We're coming to the end of the Boris Marathon now. The finish line is in sight, OK? So up next, we're going to see a clip from my earlier interview. Does Boris intend to make a Cincinnatus return to politics? And is he really enjoying his life in blameless obscurity? Let's take a look.
I think you will agree that with the boundary changes and everything else, it would have been possible for me to overcome a 2-point deficit in 2.5 years.
Well, you might have lost your seat.
Right?
Fair.
I might have overcome a 2-point deficit in 2.5 years. Plus, reform was on zero, right? OK? So that was...
Might
that was
not have won Uxbridge.
That was the position... No, I think I would have won Uxbridge.
All right.
Why not?
Okay.
Why not? That was the position as I left it, right? I was not responsible for what then happened.
OK. So are you itching to come back and try and... Do you want to... What was this Cincinnatus comment about returning to the plough?
Cincinnatus.
Come back.
Cincinnatus. So Cincinnatus was a... Cincinnatus used to return... I've basically taken up my plough. I think that I'm living a very happy life of blameless, rustic obscurity.
Mm. I don't know if you like obscurity, though.
Blameless rustic obscurity.
Do you like obscurity?
Yeah, and I'm working on various books, such as I produced this one, obviously.
Yeah. Shakespeare's coming.
That's right, and various things like that.
But don't you want to return to the political fray in the vein of your hero
as I used to say, and I repeat, I think the chances of my mounting a comeback, getting back into number 10, are about as good as my chances of being reincarnated as an olive,
but you
or
said that
decapitated
about
by a
being
frisbee,
Prime
or being
Minister.
locked in a disused
You
fridge,
said those things
or
about-
blinded by a champagne
You
cork.
literally used those phrases to describe the unlikelihood of you becoming Prime Minister,
Well, I
and then
know.
you became Prime Minister. So you could stage a comeback.
I think it remains of that order of probability.
And what
it remain, I don't know what the odds are of being blinded by a champagne cork, or locked in a disused fridge, or decapitated by a frisbee.
Well, you did once lock yourself in a fridge, to be fair.
It was not disused. It was very cold. That was the beginning of the general election
So
campaign.
can we get a yes or no? Are you going to make a political comeback? Yes or no?
I think my chances are about as good as being locked in a disused fridge.
That's not a no, is it? I know.
Or blinded by champagne.
There are lots of people shaking their head. Matthew Lazar is exhausted by that exchange.
I didn't understand. It's very hard to keep up, isn't it? There's a lot going on there. I mean, one might say that the fashionable ADHD it may be an issue there.
Well,
if I was an ADHD doctor,
I'd just avoidance tactics.
I think it's a mix. Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of bumbling for avoidance, it only gets you so far. And I think people have kind of had enough of it. What was once cute is now irritating. I mean, he clearly does want to come back. He clearly does want to be Churchill. He's having his blameless life in the country, presumably. Is he going to start building walls like Churchill used to do, didn't he?
He's making jam, actually.
Is he making jam?
Yes.
Maybe he's going to sell it like Meghan.
Oh, he and Meghan can start a company together.
I did say that. I think that was the point where you were getting mic'd up and you had to leave the interview to come into the studio. But, yeah, he's making jam. He's putting Johnson jam in jars. He can't get it to coagulate, and he's loving life, Eve.
Amazing. That's all I can say.
Would you buy some, Eve?
I think we'd all buy. I tell you what, I will read the book now. I mean, I've now become so fascinated by this man.
It's a good read, to be fair to him.
Yes, he's a very good journalist, very good writer.
You were saying earlier it's got really bad reviews. Telegraph gave it 5 stars.
Telegraph gave it 5 stars, but a lot of the reviewers are men. Interesting to see if they get. It might be for Boris. I think if I was his publishers, I think women. Look at Nadine, who thinks she's wonderful. There are a lot of women.
She's not a book reviewer. She is a book writer.
That's true. But there'll be a lot of people who think he's one of the old school and he, I mean, they won't know all the detail that that we've been through today. And they will think, oh, he was taller and blonder than Rishi and he was interesting. I mean, there is that feeling. And then there's a lot of people who feel like Alistair about him.
Yes, quite. James, why on earth would he have made the comment about Cincinnatus if he wasn't staging some kind of Churchillian return?
Well, this is wonderful because I get to use my ancient history degree for the first time ever being useful, all right? You set me up here.
In a minute he's going to mention he went to Oxford, everyone. Talking about
we want to know where the spectacles came from first.
Go on, then.
I'll tell you that one later. Well, famously about Cincinnatus is that he put his plough down and returned to Rome to go and save the day. But there are plenty of other classical allusions if he'd wanted to. Someone like Diocletian, who, when they tried to get him to come back after splitting the empire into 5, he said, no, if you knew how much fun I was having growing my cabbages, I wouldn't be coming back.
Yeah.
Or Sulla, who was the dictator who gave up power willingly. He could have used all those.
We are going
into
Michael Portillo territory. We are in the Portillo hour fully. Carry on, James.
Well, but he used the example of someone who went, oh, do you know what, you need me so much, I guess in your hour of need, I'll come back to Rome and save the day.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, maybe all the evidence we need that he wants to come back.
How desperate does the country need to be, Aubrey, for them to be... We talked earlier about Make America Great Again, bring Boris back again. Could that be a slogan?
Well, I mean, don't forget that he sort of toyed with making a comeback after Liz Truss's downfall.
Yes.
There were questions about whether or not he could return again as Prime Minister, and it's slightly disputed whether or not he would have got over the 100 MPs threshold in order to get on the ballot paper. But it sort of suggested that he still felt quite wounded, and I don't think he felt that he would have sort of rode to victory at the election off the back of her very disastrous and short-lived premiership. But I think there is a question about what the next 5 years looks like and whether or not the boosterism that we're used to hearing from Boris Johnson starts to be missed by the public because of the sort of narrative that Keir Starmer is certainly trying to peddle very early on in his premiership about difficult decisions, the massive spending cuts that are going to be needed, he says, to fix the sort of holes in the economy that were left by his Tory predecessors. But actually, I wonder if Boris Johnson finds that quite a useful space to be able to manoeuvre in over the next 5 years.
I mean, Matthew, if you were one of the Tory leadership hopefuls, would you want to keep Boris quite close? Would you be seeking Boris Johnson's counsel right now? I say that because, as much as you might want to criticise him, he did win the highest popular vote since 1979
Yeah, I don't think you'd be wanting his counsel. I think when it comes to the election, particularly if Labour's had a few difficult years, you might be wanting his stardust.
Yeah, you might want him on the campaign trail.
Absolutely. I don't think you'd be asking for strategic advice, but I think you would well want to have a bit of a oomph in the campaign.
I mean, he hasn't endorsed anyone, although he did single out one politician for praise, and that was Priti Patel, which I thought was interesting. I thought if Priti Patel remained in that race, he might be inclined to have backed her. Stick with Prit, he used to say. But do you think it would be a help or hindrance to the current quartet to have Boris Johnson come out in their support?
I think it's too soon. But I think maybe 2 or 3 years' time, we just don't know which way it'll go. We don't know what more Boris might write. We don't know what Boris will do. Be interesting to see. You can't ever... I mean, sometimes old prime ministers do come back and lend a hand. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't.
Can I thank you all for your expertise and insight this morning? It's been a little bit of a marathon rather than a sprint, but we've enjoyed it. Aubrey Allegretti, James Price, Eve Pollard and Matthew Laza, thank you very much indeed. Coming up next, I'm going to be joined by the Israeli politician Sharon Heskel, and we were going to reflect, of course, on the horrific anniversary of the October the 7th attacks. But before then, we've got the news again with Sam Francis.
Camilla, thank you very much. Just coming up to 9:30, and we start with some breaking news coming to us from the Home Office this lunchtime that a record-breaking 973 migrants crossed the English Channel in just a single day yesterday. That's according to official figures just into us in the last few minutes. They arrived in 17 small boats, surpassing the previous record set in June of 882. Saturday's surge also came as 4 migrants, including a young child, sadly died, making the journey across the Channel. The total number of arrivals this year has now reached 26,612. Well, it follows a new deal by the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, and G7 ministers to tackle criminal smuggling gangs. And some news also just breaking in the last hour or so on the conflict ongoing in Lebanon, that Israel has issued new evacuation alerts for parts of the south of the country. We can just take you live now to pictures of the scene above the skyline in Beirut, where clouds of smoke continue to linger in the air after recent attacks. The evacuation alert on Sunday for residents of around 25 areas is calling on them to head immediately north, the IDF have said on social media, asking them to move north of the Awali River. And in an afternoon of breaking news, a British climber stranded on a mountainside in northern India has been rescued after being trapped for 3 days. Reports have said that Faye Manners and an American, Michelle Dovak, were stuck at more than 21,000 feet after losing their equipment in a rockfall on Chakakumba Mountain. A French climbing group helped them to descend before being airlifted to safety by the Indian Air Force. It reportedly took local teams more than 80 hours to battle through bad weather to finally reach them. Well, the 37-year-old has celebrated the rescue on social media, saying they are back down and safe. Returning to news in the Middle East, and Sakia Starmer has raised concerns that sparks of war there are igniting tensions, he says, at home, with a sharp rise in hate crimes against Jews and Muslims. Writing in the Sunday Times today, he also raised fears of a direct conflict between Israel and Iran, which he says could have catastrophic global consequences. And finally, a memorial service marking the 50th anniversary of the Guildford pub bombings is taking place, remembering those who died in 1974. 5 people were killed in that attack when the IRA detonated 2 bombs at 2 pubs in Surrey. Families, community leaders and members of the military are among those at the service, honouring those who lost their lives. Well, that's the latest from the GB Newsroom for now. I'll be back with you for a full roundup at 1 o'clock.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello.
Hello and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. It's cloudier out there today, but brighter tomorrow with sunshine and showers before turning colder midweek. So we have an area of low pressure dominating, situated out towards the west with frontal systems wrapping around this, bringing a lot of cloud and patchy outbreaks of rain. There is some brightness through this morning and into the afternoon, especially across eastern parts of England. But for the bulk of the UK, it is going to be turning increasingly cloudy with outbreaks of rain and drizzle. The heaviest is going to be across the southwest, parts of Northern Ireland and into Wales, with the odd rumble of thunder here too. Otherwise, temperatures similar to previous days, 17 or 18 degrees as the high in the south. Now, as we go through this evening, rain across northern parts of England will continue to push into parts of Scotland, so heavy for a time towards the south, cloudy conditions towards the north of Scotland, some early evening sunshine towards the west of Northern Ireland, but still some outbreaks of rain towards the east. Otherwise, quite a messy picture across England and Wales, but some early evening sunshine also coming towards the southwest as we end Sunday. So Sunday evening and overnight, heavy spells of rain continuing to push its way north and eastwards, affecting much of Scotland, northwestern and eastern parts of England. Behind that, turning clearer, we'll see clear spells into the night, but also some heavy downpours. Temperatures are still staying up, rather mild for the time of year, 11 or 12 degrees to start Monday morning. So we have heavy spells of rain continuing across much of northern parts of Scotland, but elsewhere, any mist or fog soon lifting, and then a much brighter day. But as we go into the afternoon, we will see some heavy showers developing, possibly with the odd rumble of thunder, and also merging at times to give some longer spells of rain. Otherwise, highs staying up at 17 or 18 degrees.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Just he was gay about 3 weeks ago, which is the least...
Well, the Boris segment is over now, and we're going to focus on the anniversary, the first anniversary of the October 7th attacks tomorrow. And joining me is Israeli politician Sharon Haskell, a member of the Knesset for the New Hope Party. Thank you so much for your time today, Sharon, if I may call you that. I've interviewed
Thank you, Camilla.
Thank you. I've interviewed Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister, at length, and he told me about his own support for a two-state solution in the Israeli-Palestine conflict. Do you support a two-state solution? Is that still feasible?
Well, matter of fact, the two-state solution has failed, and the 7th of October is a proof of that. I mean, Gaza was the Palestinian state. It had an autonomy. We gave them the land without anything in return. We evacuated every single inch of Gaza. We even took the dead people out of their grave to be buried in Israel. And they turned it into a Singapore or Hong Kong? No, on the contrary. They turned it into a nest of terror, investing all their money and effort into weapons and hatred and violence. That was the dedication of that state. And unfortunately, as all Israeli woke up on the 7th of October, completely shocked and traumatized, we understand that this solution is not viable, not while there isn't a Palestinian leader who cannot even condemn the 7th of October.
Sharon, if the hostages are returned, would the war end? I mean, that's the mood music coming out of Israel, but is it possible now, even if the hostages are returned to their families?
Well, I think so. I think that most of the capability of Hamas have been broken down. There's still strongholds, like areas where Hamas is actually in control civilianly, and we need to break that too. I think the key to that is through UNRWA. But we have to say, what we are doing is to bring back our hostages. Every deal that was until now only talked about 30, 40, maximum 50 hostages that will be returned. What about the rest of them? What about 50, 60, and 70 more people who in every deal that came to the table were meant to stay in Gaza, maybe forever? What we want to do is to bring back our family members, our brothers and sisters and babies and grandparents back to the loving arms of their families.
In his book, Boris Johnson suggests that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu left a bug in his bathroom when he visited him when he was Foreign Secretary. What do you make of that story? Do you think it's true?
Well, Camilla, I think maybe we really wanted to hear how the pipes sound in Downing 10. I mean, look, to be honest, it really sounds like a really good story to sell a book.
But would it surprise you to learn that a listening device was found in the toilet after Netanyahu visited?
Well, I don't think that's definitely not by the Prime Minister. Something like that would have been left. This is not something that I think is a possibility at all, especially not among friends, and definitely not a Prime Minister. But, you know, the story sells, and I think it's a really good story in order to sell the book.
Sharon, it's going to be a hugely emotional day for the Israeli people tomorrow. As you say, we've still got hostages who will have been in captivity for a year. How are you going to be marking, as a country, the anniversary of the terror attacks by Hamas on the October the 7th?
So it's really difficult, and we are, you know, marking it while we have a full war up in the northern border of Israel, so that our family members can also return back to their homes in our northern border. For a year, they were evacuated and they were refugees. They couldn't go back to their homes to get to their property or to their belongings. And after a year, it's about time that we will return back the safety and the security to our people. And that actually puts a big shade also on these events where we have memorials in small towns and national memorials, talking to the families of some of the hostages who are still being held in those dungeons of torture in Gaza. It's heartbreaking and it's very difficult. I don't think any Israeli thought we could be at this point. And I think that the most difficult thing as a mother, it is to try and communicate it to my children. You know, they see the pictures of the hostages everywhere and they ask them questions. And how do you communicate to a child that, you know, people were abducted from their beds? And when they ask you, Mommy, can that happen to me too? What do you answer to them when you know the answer can be yes? We are still at war. We are still at risk. We spend the night in the shelters and trying to make it look a little bit nicer for them. But I think as mothers, it's the most difficult day and definitely the most difficult year that we've actually experienced here.
All right. Well, Sharon Heskell, thank you very much indeed for joining me. I hope tomorrow goes as well as one can expect. I look forward to speaking to you again soon on this subject.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, coming up next, we're going to lighten the mood a little bit because I'm going to be joined by the food editor of the Jewish Chronicle as we celebrate a taste of Britain for the Jewish New Year and more solemn occasions as we look to tomorrow's October the 7th anniversary and Yom Kippur. Don't go anywhere.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. Every night from 11 p.m.
This is some controversial film news. Someone has hired an actor who's white. What the hell is going on?
Let me just fix my hair. Let me just come on. So, Wuthering Heights film stirs controversy after white actor, he's white, chosen to play
Is that your Hamza Yusuf impersonator?
That is, that's my Chinese accent. Experts have gone, oh no, there's a lot of, in recent years, he's definitely black or mixed race because he was found in Liverpool. And as you know, everybody in Liverpool is black or mixed race.
I mean, have you read the novel?
God, no.
Right, well, I have. And the novel itself does say, quite explicitly, that he is dark-skinned.
Yeah.
That the implication is that he's of Romany origin. So he wouldn't be whiter than white, you know. So, I mean...
that's fine. Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that casting... But on the other hand...
This guy's Spanish. His origin's Spanish.
Do you remember when there was a black Anne Boleyn for a Channel 5 miniseries? That seems to be more egregious, because I tell you what, Anne Boleyn definitely wasn't black.
You racist. No, I almost feel sorry in this story because you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't now. Because if they'd have, like, it's not like he's a bit of an anti-hero, right? It's not like a good all-round.
He's not a good guy.
So if you go, right, we definitely need to cast someone black for this. What? Why are you picking just black people to play someone with so many character flaws? Or you go, why?
Like they did with Darth Vader.
Yes, that's right.
He was played by the Green Cross Code Man. Okay. Just the voice was done by...
That's true. Yeah. Yes, it was the Green Cross Code Man. I wonder what they were saying there.
Have you ever seen the videos of the original audio of Star Wars?
No.
So you've got... I can't remember his name, but you've got the Green Cross Code Man going like, I find your lack of faith disturbing. Yeah. No, Luke, I am your father.
They should have left it as it was.
This is the difference between me. We're talking about Star Wars. You're like, oh, have you read Bronte, whatever?
She only wrote one novel, Josh. You could... do with the courtesy of reading it.
I'll read it straight after I finish your one.
And it's actually brilliant.
The People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight-talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Oh, I'm delighted to see a table of food in front of me after we've had this Boris Johnson marathon today. I'm joined now by the food editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Victoria Prever, for our Taste of Britain. And as the British community have celebrated Rosh Hashanah, so the New Year, we're now approaching Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. I'm trying to get this right, Victoria. I do have a Jewish stepmother, Bernice, who I'd like to send my love to right now. And so I'm kind of familiar with all this. I don't normally get to eat food on my show because I don't cover Portillo, so this is fun. So what are you going to show me?
It's our lucky day, isn't it?
It is our lucky day. This is great.
I've gone full Jewish mother. I've brought a whole selection of things.
Yeah, this is too much for two of us. But we've got a hungry crew outside.
Absolutely. I'm very aware the eyes watching when I was preparing all of this. So I've brought a sort of smorgasbord, probably the wrong word for what I'm describing, of Rosh Hashanah food and some breaking of the fast food as we're in between the two.
Yes.
So as you say, we've just celebrated the New Year, and we do that very traditionally with apples dipped in honey.
Lovely.
So we would, when we bring in the New Year, say a blessing and dip the apple in the honey and pass it around. My kids love it.
Why the apple? Is it something biblical about it?
It's round, like the earth, some say. And also, I think there's a practical reason that they grew in lots of places, so it would be easy to source.
Perfect.
So a couple of reasons there. I hadn't really questioned it. And then in coming on the show, I thought, I better check why that was. So that was why. Mm-hmm. And the honey, apparently, in sources I've read, that in biblical times, it may not have been bee honey, which is what we use. It may have been date honey. Ooh. The land of milk and honey would have been from the abundance of dates that grew in Israel.
You better hide that jar, because my middle child, my only son, is a honey addict. Seems to drink it directly from a squeezy pot.
Yeah.
So be careful with that. Now, what can I try first?
Right, so if you want to dip, or we can use the drizzly thing.
Well, I know, but look, that's nice. Look, it's kind of like... That's good and bad. That's part of my 5 a day, but it's smothered in very sweet stuff.
Yes.
There's a thing going on at the moment where we're dipping apples in peanut butter.
Oh, I love that.
This is nice, though, isn't it?
It is. I don't think it has quite the health benefits
Can
of
I try the
peanut butter.
date honey?
Yeah, the
This
date
is
honey is a whole
intriguing.
different thing. You'd use this more probably in cooking nowadays, but it's worth a try to see the difference.
Now, Victoria, forgive me, I've got a Catholic father and a Jewish mother, so I'm well used to gatherings around food. We're marking something truly tragic for the Israeli people and for Jews tomorrow.
Yes.
And yet, at the same time, the Jewish community does celebrate with food, does celebrate with feasts, even the most awful atrocities. Why is that?
Do you know why? I don't know. I think we just keep going with food, and food maybe brings some... It brings us all together around a table.
Yeah.
And it would bring some joy. And also what I love about it is that we're all doing it everywhere in the world.
Yes.
So I think there is a real communal feel about it. And there'd be traditional foods at certain times. So Rosh Hashanah would be actually in the 7th month of the year, in the autumn time, but it's a time of harvest and abundance. So a lot of the festivals bring in what was going on in the world, really. I love the seasonality of eating apples, which are from now. Another tradition of Rosh Hashanah is to eat a new fruit. On the second day, you would try a new fruit that you haven't had that season.
Mm-hmm.
So we often go for pomegranate.
Yeah. What do we think of pomegranates?
It's
I would suggest that they're a fruit that you sprinkle on a fruit salad and then you pick them out and eat the fruit salad.
Also great for
Am I being
photography.
harsh?
Amazing.
No, they are.
At one point, I had to ban them.
They're visually pleasing. But
I had to ban them from the
eating
JC.
a fruity nut.
Totally.
Mm.
Worse than that are sabra, I think they're called. They are prickly pear, and the inside those is like just one big crunch.
Is there any reason why you're withholding the cake and these sweet
You
things?
just haven't
and
got there yet.
You're trying to give me the fruit, and I really appreciate that. But been on air now since 9:30.
OK, you're hungry.
Well, this looks nice. What's
so
this?
This is my super special Rosh Hashanah honey cake.
Ooh, well, now you are talking my language, Victoria.
So, when we've moved on from our honey and our apple and blah, blah...
I'm laying this out as a little makeshift plate.
OK, so this is something... It's not my grandma's recipe. I've tried to get close to it. Honey cake is... everyone in the Ashkenazi community, the Jews from Eastern Europe, will eat honey cake over this time of year. We'll have it at Rosh Hashanah.
To bring it closer so we can have a shot. Nice.
It's more difficult to make than you mix everything together. There's no whisking in air or anything like that. It's a whole load of ingredients into a bowl, into the oven. Mm. Sometimes doesn't even contain honey. It has a lot of...
All right.
Mine does.
While you're
Go
talking,
for
I'm going
it.
to try
Please
it.
do.
I can't resist it. It's there. It's willing me to eat it.
the most lovely cake.
But when you say from your grandmother, so sorry, what part of the world... Is this a kind of Jewish tradition, or is it, you say about Ashkenazi Jews, it's from that part of the world and
Yes. Yes. So a lot of English Jews are... Well, the predominance are Ashkenazi.
That's
so we would eat... It's really good, isn't it?
It's quite herby.
Yeah. It's got ginger, cinnamon, lots of cinnon, a little bit of allspice.
And herby.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
Golden syrup. It's got so much sugar in, I can't tell you.
Has it?
Yeah.
Am I going to be bouncing off the walls in a moment?
Possibly.
It might be channeling my inner Boris Johnson unleashed on cake. But when would you have this in the sequence of things? OK,
so this you would have on Rosh Hashanah, but also it's quite typical for people to break their fast. So on Yom Kippur, we fast for 25 hours. You would think we'd fasted for a week. We go into it with a meal, and I'm always advising people what's the best thing to start with. And then when you finish, very often people have a cup of tea. Everyone has a cup of tea.
Yes.
And you might have it with some honey cake or with some challah.
Now, tell me finally, Victoria, we have to break into this, would you believe? Because while I'm eating this cake, I'm told that Sue Gray, Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, has resigned. So tell me something very quickly about that bread.
I'll send her the cake.
Well, you may need to send her this. You might need to send some of this to Starmer, because I think it might be a difficult weekend for him. But go on, tell me about this bread.
OK,
before I just update our viewers here.
We'd have a round loaf. Normally, a challah bread, if you can imagine it, would be a long plat.
Oh, that looks nice.
And we often stud it with raisins.
This is reminding me a little bit of the Italian side of my family and panettone. Is that right or not?
It's not as cakey. But it's an enriched bread. It's got eggs. It has no dairy, because then you can have it with a meat meal, because we don't eat milk and meat together.
That's
it's sweet.
Is it wrong that I want to smother it in butter?
Not at all.
No good.
No.
Victoria, do you mind if I cut you off?
Go for it.
I'll have to do a little spiel now.
Yeah.
I'm going to deal with the Sue Gray news, which in a way is quite nicely linked to this, because she did the Partygate report, didn't she, on Boris Johnson? She was the one who was his inquisitor. In fact, he spoke about it on GB News this morning, talking about the fact that he made a mistake in asking Sue Gray to carry out that report. Sue Gray, apparently the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, has resigned. We discussed it on this panel. This is the problem that happens when the advisor becomes the story and then starts overshadowing the Prime Minister. Just to give you a bit of background on this, we don't know whether discussions were held with Sue Gray and Keir Starmer before she carried out the party report, which then questioned her impartiality. We've got a problem with a donation that was made by Lord Ali to Sue Gray's son, Liam Conlon, now the Labour MP for Beckingham and Penge. She is rumoured to have given Lord Ali that pass to Downing Street after he gave her son £10,000, which I've said before on this show, looks a bit iffy to me. We've then got rumours of disagreements within Downing Street between Sue Gray and Morgan McSweeney, who is the person in charge of Labour's policy, and now it seems it's too much to bear. Some other allegations that she's interfered with the funding of a stadium in Belfast. Suffice to say that GB News will be keeping you updated with every aspect of this story as it unfolds. It's just breaking news now. Thank you for joining me all morning. I will be back next week at 9:30. But up next, news of the big resignation in Downing Street. Enjoy your Sunday.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. It's cloudier out there today, but brighter tomorrow with sunshine and showers before turning colder midweek. So we have an area of low pressure dominating, situated out towards the west with frontal systems wrapping around this and bringing a lot of cloud and patchy outbreaks of rain. There is some brightness through this morning and into the afternoon, especially across eastern parts of England. But for the bulk of the UK, it is going to be turning increasingly cloudy with outbreaks of rain and drizzle. The heaviest is going to be across the southwest, parts of Northern Ireland and into Wales, with the odd rumble of thunder here too. Otherwise, temperatures similar to previous days, 17 or 18 degrees as the high in the south. Now, as we go through this evening, rain across northern parts of England will continue to push into parts of Scotland, so heavy for a time towards the south, cloudy conditions towards the north of Scotland, some early evening sunshine towards the west of Northern Ireland, but still some outbreaks of rain towards the east. Otherwise, quite a messy picture across England and Wales, but some early evening sunshine also coming towards the southwest as we end Sunday. So Sunday evening and overnight, heavy spells of rain continuing to push its way north and eastwards, affecting much of Scotland, northwestern and eastern parts of England. Behind that, turning clearer, we'll see clear spells into the night, but also some heavy downpours. Temperatures are still staying up, rather mild for the time of year, 11 or 12 degrees to start Monday morning. So we have heavy spells of rain continuing across much of northern parts of Scotland, but elsewhere, any mist or fog soon lifting, and then a much brighter day. But as we go into the afternoon, we will see some heavy showers developing, possibly with the odd rumble of thunder, and also merging at times to give some longer spells of rain. Otherwise, highs staying up at 17 or 18 degrees.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You really could be our next big winner with an incredible £36,000 in tax-free cash in your bank account. But what does it feel like to be a Great British Giveaway winner?
So I just text as you do and then forgot about it.
Well, I didn't believe it at first. I just thought, somebody's trying to wind me up.
You never expect to win something like that.
Definitely get you interested. If I can win it, anybody can win it.
For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB08 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 25th of October. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Arlene Foster on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A very good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock on Sunday, the 6th of October. This is The Weekend on GB News. It's been reported that Sue Gray has stepped down from the Prime Minister's top team and has been appointed as the Prime Minister's envoy for nations and regions, whatever that is. We'll bring you the very latest. Rachel Reeves's plan to significantly increase borrowing in the budget risks pushing up mortgage rates. Could this be devastating for the pennies in your pocket? Then GB News can exclusively reveal that more than 26,000 small boat migrants have crossed the English Channel so far this year, with a record 973 crossing in a single day. And coming up in the next hour, bad, not mad. That's how Boris Johnson has described Russian President Vladimir Putin in his sit-down interview with Camilla Tominey. We'll be breaking down some of the things the former Prime Minister had to say. I'm Darren Grimes, and this is The Weekend. Now, my friends, as you well know by now, this show is nothing without you and your views. Let me know your thoughts on all of the stories we'll be discussing today by visiting gbnews.com/your say and join the conversation there. Now, keeping me company on today's show, it's a very boisterous one, I must say, is the former Labour Party MP, Stephen Pound, and the former co-deputy leader of Reform UK, Ben Habib. But before we get stuck into today's stories, here's the news with Sam Francis.
Darren, thank you very much and good afternoon to you. We will start this lunchtime with that breaking news from Number 10 that Sue Gray has resigned, we understand, from her position as Downing Street Chief of Staff and will be taking on a new government role. Joining me now live